on the future relationship, and also on the Northern Ireland issue. 4 more rounds of negotiations will take place in the next few weeks. A substantial proportion of the withdrawal agreement is already agreed in principle, as we all know. There were substantial advances on the citizenship, financial aspects and transitions, and it also seems there are no step backwards. The main issues of the withdrawal agreement which are outstanding are parts of the separation provisions, still the general rules on dispute settlement, including, of course, the role of the Court of Justice, and Northern Ireland issues. An essential issue of the withdrawal agreement, which is very important for AFCO and is not yet agreed, is, of course, the institutional framework, including the governance of the agreement and the dispute settlement. These are main aspects of the negotiations still continuing. Now, I will give the floor to Guy Verhofstadt in order to get the latest information, and then we will have an exchange of views in our committee. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity as Chair of the Brexit Steering Group to debrief the AFCO, as AFCO is the leading committee in this important file in the European Parliament. And I know that your Chair, Mrs. Hübner, informs the AFCO members on a regular basis. But I think it's very useful also that we make an update because the last debriefing I did here in the AFCO meeting was on the 27th of February already. As you know, we have in fact 3 work streams in this in Brexit. First of all, the further conclusion and work on the withdrawal agreement. Secondly, the transition, what formally will be a part of the withdrawal agreement. And then third work stream, the future relationship between the UK and the EU. As you know, a withdrawal agreement has been presented on the 28th of February and has been based on the joint report that was agreed between the 2 negotiation teams in December. As you have seen in this text of the withdrawal agreement, approximately 80% of the items are put in green. That means that there is an agreement between the negotiation teams. That is a success so far, but the last 20% are obviously the most difficult bits, if I may say so. And it concerns especially 3 elements that I will mention and give some more detail about. First of all, citizens' rights. The second is Ireland, and as you already indicated, Chair, what is for AFCO a very important point, the governance of all this and the dispute settlement mechanism. On the citizens' rights, we organized yesterday here in the Parliament a special meeting, a hearing, as Brexit Steering Group, together with 5 committees, Libe, Employ, Juri, AFCO and PITI. And in this meeting we met with the UK Home Office, a team of the UK Home Office, to see a technical and to have explanation about a technical presentation of the UK's draft online application system that will be applicable after withdrawal for those EU citizens who want to continue to live and to work in Britain. What from the British side is called the settled status for the EU citizens. On the content of that status, I don't think that there are still big problems because it's mainly the prolongation of the existing status, of the existing rights, as these EU citizens have it for the moment. But it's clear that we want to be 100% sure that the procedure that will be put in place is an easy procedure, simple, without creating a bureaucratic nightmare or a new administrative burden on the 3 million EU citizens living in the UK. And yeah, it's opening, I would say, an open door when I'm saying that the latest Windrush scandal in the UK has created new anxiety under the EU citizens living there. It's clear from our work yesterday that the Home Office is working very hard on setting up a user-friendly application system. But it's also clear that there are still a number of concerns from all sides. First of all, the accessibility for vulnerable persons, people who are not capable, for example, to use the digital form, the digital application that will be ready. Secondly, concerns about the protection of the data that will be put in the system. Also, concerns about the proportionality of the criminality checks and the consequences of these checks. Because what does it mean if you have a criminal record? Normally, if you have a criminal record, that doesn't mean that you cannot continue to live in the country where you have this criminal record. What are the consequences of this? The treatment also of family applications. The treatment of family application, because it's in our point of view of the Brexit steering group and the 5 committees, is that there should be possible for one family application. And not separate applications. And then finally, also the costs of such an application. Application will cost a little bit more than £70 sterling, 72.5 pounds sterling. But yeah, it's not the fault of the EU citizens that there is a Brexit. It's not their fault that they need to ask for a new settled status to cover their rights in the future. So we agreed yesterday with the chairs of the 5 committees to send a consolidated reaction in the form of a follow-up letter of questions and comments that will be sent to the UK authorities and the Home Office with a number of remarks, a number of comments, a number of questions, but also with a number of recommendations. And it's my intention, Chair, that this letter is not only sent in the name of the Brexit Steering Group, but also in the name of the 5 committees who are involved in this. So Libe, Employ, Juri, AFCO, and the Petty Committee. So that's on citizens' rights. So certainly, I want to repeat it, Home Office is clearly working hard on setting up a user-friendly application system, but we need to get this right from day one, because normally that system will be applicable by the end of this year, beginning of next year. Then the second point that where naturally progress is absolutely needed is on the issue of Ireland. You know that we have now the joint report because with clear provisions about Ireland and the Irish border. We have also the written assurances by Prime Minister May to President Tusk in this regard. The guarantee of no hard border, the preservation of the North-South cooperation, and also in that letter the agreement of Mrs. May with a backstop if there is no other solution found to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. And this backstop, you know it, the backstop is envisaging that Northern Ireland should effectively remain within the customs union if no other solution is found to avoid a hard border. It's clear that the ball is now on the side of the UK to come forward with a satisfactory solution. Until today, that is not the case. And I think it's very important that as the European Parliament, we follow this very much in detail, because we have made it from day one perfectly clear that as Parliament we will not give our consent to a withdrawal agreement without a guarantee, 100% assurance that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. So that's the second outstanding issue, and for the moment we are still have no the proposal made by the UK side that could be a satisfactory solution for the problem. And so for us, we fall back then to the backstop solution that has been put in the joint report and also in the written assurance by Prime Minister May to the President of the Council, President Tusk. The third point on which naturally that I want to mention is on transition. On transition, I think what is important to mention is what it covers. It will cover the period from the end of March 2019 until the 31st of December 2020. During this transition, the full acquis of the European Union will apply to the United Kingdom and in the United Kingdom. The only difference will be that there will be no longer a participation of the United Kingdom in the EU institutions and in the EU decision making. You know, I repeat it, I said it already, that the provisions on transition are formally a part of the withdrawal agreement. So that means that there is only an agreement on this transition period if we successfully conclude, naturally, the Article 50 agreement in the coming months. And this within the next 11 months. It's important also to mention that concerning the EU citizens arriving in the UK during the transition period, it's clear that they will enjoy the same rights and guarantees as those who arrive before Brexit. And that's important because at a certain moment there was some doubt about this, that citizens arriving after the withdrawal date of March 2019 during the transition should have the same rights as the EU citizens already living there. So it will be the case. This, there will be no difference for a EU citizen who is living there before withdrawal or an EU citizen entering in the UK after the withdrawal date and before the end of the transition. My last point of my report, Chair, will be about the future relationship. As you know, this is also maybe the most important point for the future, because as we all know, we need to have also a joint declaration, a political declaration at least, on the future relationship as an annex for the withdrawal agreement. That's the letter and also from Article 50. As you know, we have produced with the European Parliament, based on an input from all relevant committees, a very extensive, I should say, resolution or fourth resolution concerning Brexit, which was adopted, as you know, by our plenary on the 14th of March with, may I say so, a very large majority, 544 in favour, 110 against, with 51 abstentions. So it's an enormous, huge majority. And this resolution followed a number of seminars that we organized together with the European Commission in the first trimester of this year. And we invited to the seminars, naturally, all the committees involved in these different matters. As you know, what the resolution of the European Parliament tries to do is to bridge between, at the one hand, the red lines of the UK, and at the other hand, the principles of the EU. We did that by proposing an association agreement between the European Union and the UK, based on Article 8 and Article 217 of the treaty. An association agreement that will be based on 4 pillars. A trade and economic pillar, a pillar on foreign policy, a pillar on internal security, and then a 4th pillar on thematic cooperation. Can be our cooperation in Euratom, can be our cooperation in aviation in the future, could be the participation of the UK in Horizon 2020, in Erasmus, and so on. We proposed also in this resolution a consistent governance framework with a robust dispute resolution mechanism, and naturally the need to respect the integrity of the internal market, the customs union, and naturally also the 4 freedoms were underpinning these internal market, and especially. And finally, we also reiterated that a solution on the Northern Irish question needs to be found that ensures no diminution of rights, that preserves also the cooperation between North and South, and that avoids, as we know, a hard border. The Council, from their side, adopted guidelines, as you know, that happened on the 23rd of March, based on the same principles, but there is quite a difference. The guidelines of the Council are only reiterating a number of principles, why we, in our resolution, with a resolution of 65 paragraphs, have gone more in detail, showing the way forward, where you can bridge the red lines of the UK with the principles of the European Union. I think it's also important in this format, Chair, to underline why Parliament has put an association agreement as on the table. Because we think that we have to avoid an inflation of agreements between the EU and the UK, and to create one governance, so to avoid what's happened naturally because of historical reasons in our relationship with Switzerland, where we have more than 100 agreements, but no overall governance, what is one of the weaknesses of this. The other advantage is that it is a flexible framework. Not only it creates one governance, but you can put in an association agreement we propose 4 pillars, but you could easily also say, oh, I limit it to 1 pillar or to 2 pillars or 3 pillars. There is a lot of flexibility, a huge flexibility in this instrument as we find it in the treaty. And a last and maybe very important also argument that we need to underline is that with an association agreement there will be a need for an approval by the European institutions, the Council, the Parliament, and so on. If it is mixed, and it will be mixed in a certain way, there will only be needed 1 approval by Member States, ratification by Member States. If it are 10 or 15 or 20 different arrangements, then we're going to be in a ratification process for years, while with an association agreement, 1 approval will be necessary. And moreover, and that's also important, an association agreement can already be applied before the ratification by the Member States, what is also a huge advantage compared to other arrangements we could make. I had the possibility, Chair, to present also this proposal of the association agreement in a Sherpa meeting with the European Council, and secondly also in Downing Street 10, directly to Prime Minister May. And I think that everybody starts to see that this could be the way forward, because that doesn't mean that all the problems are solved naturally, because you have still to negotiate the 4 pillars, but at least it's a consistent framework that you find in our treaties, and could be a good basis to start the negotiation about our future relationship. And again, that a declaration about that future relationship is absolutely needed to have an agreement on the withdrawal, as this declaration on the future relationship has to be, makes part, will be an annex. We will see how we do it in a more formal way, but is needed to conclude our negotiations also on the withdrawal agreement. What are the next steps, Chair? The next steps is that there will be a Council meeting on the 26th of June, which will be a stock-taking exercise ahead of the October Council meeting. And in this October Council meeting, there normally a final version of the withdrawal agreement should be agreed by the EU and the UK. And that is needed to give sufficient time for a timely ratification by the European Parliament, the Council, and the United Kingdom. At this moment, progress is mainly made at the technical level. There are, for the moment, scheduled 4 negotiation rounds between the 2 negotiation teams before the Council meeting in June. 4 negotiation rounds on which we are debriefed on after every negotiation round by Michel Barnier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your extensive explanations. I will now open the floor to members if they wish to raise some questions. I will begin with Mr. Schöpflin. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and my thanks to Mr. Verhofstadt. A very interesting, very thorough account of where we're at. Now, I have a number of questions about this entire process, because, well, we're a little short of 2 years, and it seems to me that not that much has been actually attained in 2 years. And I certainly have lived this time watching a loss of trust between the two parties. Difficult negotiations not least because I think the UK side was really unprepared for what it had voted for. And secondly, there's a transactional approach in the way in which things are done in Britain, that I give you a little bit, you give me a little bit, rather than seeing a set of firm principles on the basis of which European Union, well, Council and Commission and indeed ourselves have approached this. So we have this legacy, it seems to me, of the long dilatoriness with which the United Kingdom has handled the departure. And on the other side, and I think we can't afford to ignore this, what we're looking at in the case of the United Kingdom is a deeply divided country. It's divided politically, divided between hardline Brexiteers and indeed Remainers. I think they're equally hardline, actually, with whom it's very difficult to see where there's any common ground. Second, the country itself is divided. I mean, if you look at geographically, London, Scotland, Northern Ireland voted to stay. The rest of the country basically votes to leave. And of course, sociologically, there are very different categories of those who want to leave and those who want to stay. And in that sense, by the way, this should be a warning to every European Union country. There's an urgent need that these divisions are not replicated elsewhere. In that sense, the United Kingdom, I think, turned out to be an extreme case of a potentially all-European problem. My own sense, and I've said this before, is that without a serious constitutional rearrangement in the United Kingdom, the country will remain a divided, badly regulated state with which it will be very difficult for us to maintain a relationship. That's, I mean, if this were a faraway country of which we knew nothing, this probably wouldn't matter. But, you know, this is next door, and we do want to have a relationship with the United Kingdom. It's very difficult to have a relationship with a country which itself doesn't really know where it's going. Three questions. Well, question mark to any of what I've just said, but three questions. In terms of the UK, of the European Union citizens in the United Kingdom, are there any figures of how many are leaving? We know, certainly from Hungary, I know there are now more people leaving the United Kingdom from Hungary than are going there. But I just wondered if this is being replicated in any other member state, because that may be indicative of a longer-term process. Secondly, the dispute settlement. Now, I regard this as in some ways the single most important factor in the future relationship. My question is, whatever arrangement we come to, can it or can it not be overridden by the Westminster Parliament? It's to do with parliamentary sovereignty. And thirdly, the association agreement about which you spoke, Mr. Verhofstadt, as a very positive development, which of course I entirely accept, but will that, even the very word, will that be acceptable to the hardline Brexiteers in your estimation?
Thank you very much. I will continue with my list of speakers. Now, Mrs. Mercedes Bresso.
Grazie Presidente. Intanto ringrazio il collega Verhofstadt perché ci ha fatto un quadro molto chiaro e anche piuttosto rassicurante sullo stato del negoziato sulle prime due parti del lavoro che c'è da fare, cioè sul withdrawal agreement e sul periodo di transizione. Su questo mi pare che siamo a un buon punto e quindi aspettiamo ovviamente che ci sia la conclusione definitiva con il Regno Unito, ma mi pare che il lavoro sia molto interessante. un paio di considerazioni sulla più complessa parte, che però è anche molto importante, che riguarda il futuro, quindi il framework degli accordi futuri. Anche a me pare che l'ipotesi di proporre uno status di associazione sia importante sia per le ragioni che venivano ricordate, il fatto di avere una governance unica, evitare al massimo il caso Svizzera, che è un caos continuo, e soprattutto avere poi una procedura di ratifica controllabile, accettabile in termini di tempi e di complessità. Riducendone la complessità, i tempi sono anche più facili poi da rispettare. La questione che resta sostanzialmente aperta sia per quanto riguarda l'Irlanda che per quanto riguarda il futuro, la parte diciamo economica delle relazioni future. Anche sulle altre ci sono molte questioni, ma al momento non abbiamo il quadro dello stato del dibattito all'interno del Regno Unito, mentre sulla questione della modalità di partecipazione al mercato unico, invece recentemente c'è stata una presa di posizione della Camera dei Lord che ha sostanzialmente chiesto che la Custom Union si applichi all'intero Regno Unito, e questo ovviamente sarebbe di grande importanza per la soluzione del problema irlandese, perché andrebbe, come dire, di default provocherebbe una risoluzione del problema irlandese. Ecco, su questo a livello dei negoziati avete avuto qualche segnale di come venga presa questa posizione della Camera dei Lord, che appunto è molto interessante perché è rappresenterebbe un sostanziale passo avanti nel negoziato sulle future relazioni. Credo che questo punto sarebbe molto importante. Un'ultimissima domanda. Nel periodo di transizione, essendo evidente che il Regno Unito non farà più parte delle istituzioni europee, ma anche tenendo conto del fatto che sia coloro che sono membri dell'EAE, dello spazio economico europeo, e la stessa Svizzera vengono normalmente invitati ai consigli informali e quindi hanno, diciamo, un punto di contatto con l'istituzione Consiglio. Abbiamo riflettuto noi su quale punto di contatto potrebbe avere invece il Parlamento europeo in questa fase, per evitare una differenza informativa anche, no, rispetto a quello che succede. Evidentemente per noi è più complesso, però forse potrebbe essere immaginabile una qualche forma di contatto con i parlamentari. Ad esempio abbiamo recentemente parlato dei parlamentari, quindi in via informale i parlamentari del Regno Unito potrebbero essere invitati, così come vengono invitati i governi ai consigli informali, potrebbero essere invitati a delle riunioni o del Parlamento europeo o delle riunioni con i parlamenti nazionali. Voilà, queste sono le domande che mi facevo. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Now, Martina Anderson, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt, for that detailed update that you've given us, and I think we all find it in this committee quite informative and gives us an insight into the work that's been done by the Brexit Steering Group. If we go back to the joint report in December that was agreed by the British Government and the EU, and at that time, after the joint report was signed off, we had David Davis dismissing the commitments that had been agreed as mere statements of intent. And if we remind ourselves, the resolution, recital P, at that time quite clearly stated that they had to be put into legal form. And the British government was given the 3 months from December until March to come up with one of the 3 proposals, and if they didn't do option A or option B, it would have to be the backstop. We then, as you reminded us, have the letter from Theresa May confirming and committing to the backstop, and the backstop appeared in the withdrawal agreement. And unfortunately, since then, we've had a lot of derogatory comment coming from the Brexiteers, both within the Tory administration and the DUP, with regards to that backstop and whether that backstop is a backstop or the backstop, or if it was agreed. And at the time, we had advocated way back in December that we should be caution and advocated caution, and we should be more cautious with regards to what the British government had agreed, because nobody knows the British government better than us in Ireland when it comes to implementing agreements that they have made. And we are in a situation that there are still outstanding commitments to the Good Friday Agreement that has yet to be made, and hence the reason why we were advocating caution. And I think that has played out to be and should have been the best approach for us all to take, because, you know, even today in the Irish Times, you're having comments from the DUP with regards to the Irish government and what the Irish government has agreed in this backstop, and, you know, sending a warning signal to the Irish government about the future relationship, that they needed to back off this backstop, you know, in pursuing that, even though in the one hand you're telling us we have the letter, the commitment from the Theresa May with regards to the backstop. So I just put that into the Brexit steering group, because in the one hand they're saying something, and then in the other hand they're doing something completely different. And I think the problem is the negotiations haven't stopped in London with London. So, you know, they're still in that conflict among themselves, and therefore they haven't really negotiated with the EU yet. In relation to the backstop, taking on board the commitment that has been given by Theresa May, if that's what it is, in the letter and in the joint report, and I know the Irish government is standing quite firm on this, as is the EU, with regards to unless and until something better, it is a backstop. I'm concerned that it doesn't capture services. And we've had, for instance, comments made that maybe medical care would, for instance, be dealt with within the common travel area. I think we need to remind ourselves that the common travel area, the bilateral agreement between the British and the Irish, is embedded in EU law. So if that is the case, things like medical care, there would need to be specific legislation, a process for the North in order to implement and replicate EU law. So I don't think people should just say, well, that can be dealt with in the common travel area, as if that will be a given, because that is not the case. I was at the meeting yesterday and heard the concerns from the 3 million before we heard from the Home Office around its technological solution to how it's going to process people who have felt as EU citizens, as they were, and now feel like British migrants, and having to apply in the way they're applying in Britain. And I think the technological process that was given to us yesterday, despite maybe all best efforts, is almost like the technological solution that is being proposed for the border in Ireland that we had in August. It was dismissed, and rightly so. It was dismissed as not a workable solution, and we're still hearing this from the British government, from the DUP, as to there should be a solution, despite the fact that it has been dismissed. The issue, and you reminded us, and thank you for that, about the resolution that we just signed off and the 544 MEPs who have done so, and that there would be no diminution of our rights. And I think that's one that we have to pay more due regard to. And I would ask if the Brexit Steering Group, in line with paragraph 52 of the joint report that was agreed, that people in the north of Ireland who are entitled to EU rights as EU right holders would be able to enjoy and access and exercise our rights, and that was agreed in the joint report. It's to find out and to ascertain what kind of mechanism is being put in place to ensure that those rights can be validated for those those of us who live in the north who are entitled to have EU rights. It's not like we've gone to a third country. We have got a Good Friday Agreement, an international agreement that's lodged at the United Nations. And he asked if the Brexit Steering Group has looked for the Annex of rights, because Annex 1 of the protocol had said that there would be a list of those rights, and we haven't yet seen that annex. And if we remember the issue that was agreed with regards to social and democratic rights, then there's an entitlement that this committee hasn't been able to deal with. There's entitlement for those in the north to stand for and elect an MEP, or two, as the case will be. So, and I think that's, I know you have made reference to that before, about the need for an MEP in the north. And I think if we get, you know, we need to have the political will to be able to make that happen, and that needs to be put on the table to be able to address what the Parliament agreed to, that the democratic and social rights of those in the north would be upheld in full. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you very much as well. Now give the floor to Mrs. Scott Cato.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. And I'm sorry, Mr. Verhofstadt, that I'm sitting directly behind you, so it's not very easy to ask you a question. I wanted to start by responding to Mr. Scherpflin and his comments about the divisions in British society, which of course are really distressing for a British person like myself. But I wanted to say that this is very much linked to the way the campaign was run, and it's worth everybody here investigating the current inquiries into the kind of techniques that were used, particularly by SCL Elections and their offshoot companies like Cambridge Analytica, because their stock in trade is creating divisions in order to win elections, and they've played exactly the same trick in terms of creating divisions to win the Brexit referendum. And obviously there's a very destructive consequence in terms of Britain, not just because we are now engaged in this process of very destructive process of leaving the EU, but also because the divisions remain behind, as they do in other countries that have been the target of SCL elections. But I have to say that my experience and my knowledge is that actually the country is not geographically divided as you suggest. In most places, the margin is within 60-40. The divisions are much more about class, education, and also this psychological profiling that SCL elections used. But I wholeheartedly agree with you about the need for significant constitutional reform, particularly a written constitution, a democratically elected second chamber, and perhaps most important of all, a fair voting system. I've got two specific questions about your presentation, Mr. Verhofstadt. The first one is about the level playing field. Now, I attended a meeting with Mr. Barnier here in the Parliament about environmental regulation after Brexit the week before last, and I think he made it very clear that his negotiating guidelines mean that the future trading agreement will have a restriction such that if the UK attempts to undermine the current standards we have, which obviously are at the same level as EU standards, on any issue, whether it's tax, whether it's environment, whether it's regulation of medicines or whatever, if we attempt to reduce the level of regulation, then there will be repercussions in terms of our trade freedom and so on. So my own sense of what's happening here, and I think we put this very clearly in our own resolution as well, is that the UK will not be able to maintain any kind of close trading partnership with the EU unless we keep the highest standards of regulation that we currently have. And I'm really asking whether that's how you see it as well. And then my other issue is about a report that we're discussing in our committee, which we actually discussed on Monday, from Brian Hayes, which is about financial regulation with third country regimes. Now, since the beginning of this, since the referendum actually, I've been waiting for the City of London to come forward with a Trojan horse to attempt to get a kind of bespoke deal which will then undermine the unity of the single market. And there are some kind of approaches, I would say, in that report that make me a little bit nervous. For example, there's a suggestion that bilateral negotiations might be a better way of organising an equivalence regime for financial regulation than, bilateral negotiations might be a better way of organising agreement on financial regulation than the equivalence regime. And to me, it's very important that we maintain the equivalence regime as part of the unity of the single market. So I just wanted to alert you to that and to make sure that we don't allow a Trojan horse in through the back door there.
Okay, thank you. I have two more speakers in my list. Ramon Jauregui, you've got the floor.
Gracias, presidente. Yo quería, en primer lugar, agradecer al señor Verhofstadt su información, como siempre, precisa y generosa, y quería hacerle tres comentarios sobre tres temas que me preocupan. En primer lugar, a propósito de los derechos ciudadanos. Me consta que la Comisión PETI viene expresando algunos elementos particulares que han ido presentando las asociaciones ciudadanas en esa comisión. Pero simplemente quiero reiterar la importancia de la preocupación que nos transmiten muchas asociaciones ciudadanas que están allí, en el Reino Unido, fundamentalmente respecto al censo que el Reino Unido está elaborando de residentes legales. Entonces, hay una enorme preocupación porque los trámites que se exijan para que el Reino Unido otorgue la condición de residente legal incluya tal complejidad burocrática que deje fuera a residentes legales que no cumplen alguna de las exigencias en materia de antecedentes penales, etcétera. Esta es la primera preocupación. La segunda es los familiares y los derechos de movimiento que esos ciudadanos tendrán y, consecuencia de lo anterior, la situación tan hostil en la que quedarán las personas europeas que no se incluyan en el estatus de residentes legales en el Reino Unido. Estas son un poco las preocupaciones respecto a que la materialización de los derechos de los europeos que viven en el Reino Unido solo se va a producir para quienes obtengan esa condición. Y en ese terreno hay, pues, digamos, una preocupación creciente. La segunda cuestión tiene que ver con algo que se parece a lo que planteaba la señora Scott. Es la importancia de que el acuerdo de asociación sea un acuerdo que incluya compromisos muy serios en materia de fiscalidad, porque el Reino Unido tiene algunos espacios fiscales opacos cuyo mantenimiento constituye un obstáculo a la justicia fiscal en general, pero obviamente del resto de la Unión Europea en este caso, hasta ahora. Lo digo porque en el Parlamento Europeo venimos trabajando desde hace ya más de 3 años con una política de aspiración a la justicia fiscal internacional derivado de los Panama Papers, derivado de los acuerdos de Luxemburgo, etcétera, de los rulings. Claro, el futuro en materia fiscal va a requerir que un acuerdo con el Reino Unido implique compromisos muy serios en materia de fiscalidad. Yo creo que esto es fundamental y me parece que debe tenerse en cuenta en el marco de lo que es el acuerdo de asociación. En tercer lugar, el acuerdo de asociación a mí me parece una fórmula, yo coincido con usted, absolutamente necesaria y, por supuesto, es el mecanismo lógico para establecer el marco de relaciones futuras con el Reino Unido desde la Unión Europea. Un solo acuerdo, fundamentalmente, un acuerdo de asociación del que puedan derivarse todos los demás. Pero mi pregunta es si antes del 2020 no se formaliza ese acuerdo, es decir, si el Parlamento Europeo y, en su caso, el Parlamento Británico no ratifican ese acuerdo de asociación antes de diciembre del 2020, ¿hay alguna previsión sobre qué ocurriría en ese caso? Y, por último, un comentario sobre Gibraltar. Usted sabe que las guidelines que estableció el Consejo y también nuestra primera resolución, la del Parlamento Europeo, mandataban al Reino Unido y a España para alcanzar un acuerdo sobre el futuro de Gibraltar, el marco de relaciones con Gibraltar. Gibraltar se va de la Unión Europea junto al Reino Unido y queda pendiente en el contexto de los dos países si regulan un acuerdo de futuro sobre Gibraltar. Hubo inicialmente en España una tentación, digamos, de aprovechamiento de la circunstancia para plantear la cuestión de la soberanía sobre Gibraltar. Y esa era digamos, un camino que puede ser legítimo en términos de política reivindicativa de la soberanía de Gibraltar por parte de España, pero seguramente nos iba a llevar a un callejón sin salida, a una imposibilidad de solución. Afortunadamente, en mi opinión, España ha adoptado un camino más pragmático y no va a plantear en sus conversaciones con el Reino Unido un planteamiento maximalista sobre la soberanía de Gibraltar, lo cual, sinceramente, me parece razonable. Es más pragmático. Me consta que el Reino Unido y España están negociando. Ya se han producido varias reuniones y eso es bueno. Pero el acuerdo con el Reino Unido va a tener que incluir forzosamente toda una serie de materias en la convivencia de ese pequeño lugar del Peñón con España, principalmente de transparencia fiscal, que es muy importante porque nuestra impresión es que Gibraltar está resultando un espacio fiscal opaco que lesiona los intereses fiscales de España. Con toda razón, España pide transparencia y acuerdos en materia de utilización del aeropuerto, de las aguas y en materia de comunicación entre sus ciudadanos. Yo pienso que ese acuerdo es importante, pero quiero llamar la atención sobre la exigencia de que ese acuerdo incluya toda una serie de elementos de convivencia con el Peñón que incluyan respecto a ellos al Reino Unido y a España. Y eso es todo. Gracias, señor Verhofstadt.
Thank you, Ramon. I'll give the floor to Mrs. McGuinness.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt, for your patience and the detail in which you presented this morning. I suppose what I'm reflecting on is what my constituents along the border are feeling at the moment, which is a deep sense of unease about the lack of progress on finding a solution. And I know that we're very fixed on doing that and we're very willing to find that solution. I very much welcome that David Davis, MP, came to the border region this week. And if he's coming again, I'm very happy to meet him at the border so that we can have a conversation about these things. I'm a little bit troubled by comments made by our colleague here, Diane Dodds, in a newspaper article this morning in the Irish Times, perhaps suggesting that the Irish government is, as she writes, quietly falling into line with the EU position, and language that really doesn't help us find a solution for people on the ground. On the other hand, I would ask Diane and her colleagues in the DUP, who are very powerful at the moment in the United Kingdom, to please use their power wisely and responsibly, and to think carefully about what could happen next. It is in the interests of Northern Ireland and the European Union to solve the Irish border issue, because there are bigger things at play here, and there is a Good Friday Agreement that we need to protect and defend. So while I read and take on board, I'm going to rise above all of that and hope that the British Prime Minister will deliver on her commitment. She has been very firm that she will do that and that we will find words for this backstop, mindful that we all want the first option to work. We want a really good trading relationship, partnership, whatever we call it. And I do note that Diane Dodds talks about a new customs partnership and an ambitious free trade agreement. We all can work with some words around this, but we have to see good faith. We have to see the backstop. And I hope that our quiet persistence on this and the work of Michel Barnier will deliver
sooner rather than later. I'm anxious about it being left till October. I would prefer that this is done in June. The people I represent are also anxious, and they deserve better than having to wait many months for some certainty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Still a last-minute intervention by Mr. Betten.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, what we're listening to here today is people who don't want Britain to leave the European Union and will do everything they possibly can to prevent it happening. Well, I've got a simple question, but I'd like to just make a couple of comments, if I may, on what's been said before, because we've heard some things about division in society in the UK. Well, I can reassure you it's not as divided as you might think. There is a division between the people who voted to leave and the political class and the media class, especially in the broadcast media, who actually don't want us to leave, and themselves will do whatever they can to prevent it. But I can assure you that although I don't want another referendum, if there was one, the Leave side would win by a much bigger majority. Now, we've heard that we need constitutional reform in the UK, which is something I actually agree with and something I've argued for a long time. We need some kind of proportional representation. One of the political institutions that opposes exit from the EU, of course, is the House of Lords, which is doing everything it can to thwart it and prevent it. And they don't represent anybody but themselves, having been appointed. And, of course, there are a large number of people there who enjoy EU pensions and are not supposed to say anything against the EU under the terms of the pension that they receive. So I don't think it's a very fair system that we've got in the UK. And if it was reformed, you would find a much higher number of leavers in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords if they were elected on a proportional representation system. Comment on the way the referendum was conducted, and again, quite right, it was conducted unfairly, but for different reasons than my colleagues were saying. Over £9 million was spent on a booklet from the government arguing that we should stay in, which was sent to every household, where the Leave side had no such corresponding advantage or amount of money. We saw that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, was headed up a Project Fear campaign with the civil service behind him producing figures, which in actual fact now have been utterly and totally discredited. And instead of there being an economic downturn because of Brexit, we're actually seeing employment up and investment up. So these people misused the services of the state in order to advance an argument which has now proved to be false. So in actual fact, it was unfairly conducted, I agree with you, and it was unfairly conducted on the part of the Remain side, and nevertheless Leave managed to win. Now my question is very simple really. It's regarding this withdrawal agreement, the final version of it, and this proposed association agreement. Now, Mr Hofstadt, I think, said that this has to be agreed in June, by the 26th of June, with the Council meeting. It certainly has to be voted on in the Parliament in autumn, by the autumn, because Britain is supposed to leave on the 29th of March 2019. Now, I can foresee a situation where we could end up with a withdrawal agreement, which is something I've been warning against for some years, ever since this process started, even before the referendum, that if we ended up with a withdrawal agreement, it could well be a withdrawal agreement whereby we don't really leave at all. It's a withdrawal agreement in name, but we don't actually leave. We stay in reality. And this is where we seem to be guided to now, not just by Mr Hofstadt, but our own government, who are caving in on everything and are completely and utterly useless in these negotiations. Now, my question is this. When that withdrawal agreement comes before Parliament, I can foresee that there will be people in the Parliament who will vote against it because they think it doesn't go far enough. And there will be people who vote against it, for example, something I might do, because it goes too far. So if it is actually defeated in the Parliament in the autumn, but Britain is leaving on the 29th of March, what are you going to do? What's going to be your stance on this? Because the British government stance should be, then, that we leave under our terms, not yours. But I'm very interested to know what you're going to do if this withdrawal agreement is rejected in the Parliament and we're back to square one where we were on the 26th of June 2016.
Thank you. And now, as you can imagine, after Mr. Batten, I have a last minute intervention. Now, Richard Covert, you got it.
Thank you. I had not intended to speak in this debate because I arrived late and didn't hear the introduction and what had been said so far. But listening to the last intervention, I've been provoked, shall we say, to take the floor just to re-establish some balance. Yes, there is a demand that seems to be growing in Britain for a referendum on the actual deal once a deal is made on the withdrawal agreement, assuming one is made. Opinion polls show growing support for that. A campaign was launched on a cross-party basis by a number of organisations a week ago to argue for that. If that were to happen, it's by no means certain that it would go the way Mr. Batten suggested, that the public would vote again for Brexit. Again, opinion has not done what one would intuitively have expected. You would have expected public opinion to rally behind the result of the referendum held 2 years ago. People would say, well, we've had a referendum, it's settled, let's get on with it. That's clearly not happened. If anything, it's moving the other way. I had a meeting yesterday in London with a group of people who'd voted for Brexit and regret it and are demanding the right to reconsider. And that demand is growing because the emerging Brexit is clearly very, very different from what was promised by the Leave campaign. They promised that Brexit would save lots of money, that would all go to the National Health Service. Well, Brexit is, in fact, turning out to be a very costly exercise. They claimed Brexit would not damage the economy, and contrary to what Mr. Batten just said, it clearly has damaged the British economy. Britain had the highest growth rate of the G7 countries 2 years ago. It's now got the lowest growth rate of the G7 countries. The pound has significantly devalued against the euro. The government deficit went up after the referendum and has added to public debt, even if, of course, the long-term trend is for it to go down. But there's been a delay in getting back to a reasonable balance in the budget. The Bank of England has had to do what's called quantitative easing, printing money in the immediate aftermath of the referendum. I could go on and on, but the overall impression for the public is that Brexit is not delivering in the way that they were led to believe by the highly misleading Leave campaign, which Mr. Batten knows a lot about, of course. But so who knows? There may well be a rejection of the deal by the House of Commons, in which case there will be a ratification crisis, in which case a referendum is one of the possible options that will no doubt be considered. And we will see. The feeling that it is not entirely a done deal is a growing one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to give the floor to Guy Verhofstadt. You have a quite extensive list of issues. You have the floor.
Yeah, Chair. I will not make comments on the ongoing discussion in the UK because I think then we have to meet every day here, and we should be more.
Yes, that will save us
and
a
that's
lot
not.
of time.
I don't think that's our task to do so as European Parliament, and it's also not the assumption under which we work. Britain has taken a decision. We respect that decision to invoke Article 50, and we are obliged to work under this Article 50 arrangement and the clear rules that are described in Article 50. And that's what we are doing. So we are not working as Brexit steering group, neither as European Parliament in our resolutions in the idea, maybe they will change their mind. And if they change their mind, what are we going to do? So that we don't do. And that's normal. We don't want to interfere in the internal discussions in the UK. And we're going to not start to make different scenarios in the case that this is happening or that is happening or another thing could emerge. So what I want to underline is that in any way from the EU side there is a strong unity between the 27, but also, and that's very important, between the three institutions on this ongoing negotiations. And we work in a close relationship with the European Council and naturally with the European Commission and with Michel Barnier. And it's therefore that in the first 3 months of this year, we have concentrated all work on common common meetings, seminars with the Commission. The Commission did exactly the same exercise with the Council to have a common view on the different elements that could be a part of that future relationship. My second point is on Ireland, because a number, Ms. Anderson, Mrs. McGuinness have put. Our hope is that we can find, and it should be that's the way forward in June already, an agreement on this. I have seen that, I've heard that Mr. David Davies said, yeah, maybe October, but I think October is late, because in October we need to be ready with the whole withdrawal agreement, and including Ireland, plus already a declaration of a future relationship. So if you look to the agenda, the best way forward is that this problem is solved the fastest as possible, and ultimately before the June European Council. That said, I want to repeat that Mrs. May has sent a written assurance to the President of the Council, President Tusk, in this regard, and also confirmed the backstop arrangement if no other good solution can be found. So if people say there is no solution for Ireland, I say there is a solution for Ireland because there is a backstop. And that is the reason of the backstop. The reason for the backstop is that if there is no other satisfactory solution that can be found between with the UK, or the UK doesn't come forward with a convincing solution, then we have the written assurance that the backstop will be put in place and would apply. And I think that's the enormous step forward we have made in March compared to the situation in December, because people can say, oh, what is now the progress between December and March on the issue of Ireland? Well, that's the progress. The recognition, the agreement on a backstop if no other satisfactory solution has been agreed. Next point that I want to raise is questions about Mr. Schöpflin asked for that. On figures, we don't have official figures about. I don't like the word migration. Inside the European Union, there doesn't exist migration, Mr. Schöpflin. There exists labour mobility. Mobility, that is what we have. Migration, we are all European citizens, and it's a little bit. I find it always strange when somebody, he is a EU citizen, he goes to another EU country to work, says, yeah, he's a migrant. He's not a migrant, in my opinion. He's simply living in yeah, I call it labour mobility. But yeah, okay. But what I read together with you, I think, in the press is that there are already problems in a number of sectors in Britain because people have left. European citizens have left. Shortages in the hospitals, for example, is one of the clear problems already that you can find in the British press about that. I agree also with Mr. Schöpflin when he says that we need to further work next to the Northern Irish issue is the dispute settlement and the governance of the whole withdrawal agreement. We have a clear proposal. The negotiator have put that on table, and for us it's important that the withdrawal agreement becomes a full part of the UK law. That's also the best way to secure this as one of the elements, besides naturally the dispute settlement mechanism that will be necessary. To those who intervened about Tondo, for example, on the EU citizens and the settled status, I can only repeat what I said in my introduction. We have still a number of question marks, still a number of concerns, not so much on the content of these rights, because that has been secured, but on the way people will obtain them and on the procedures. And so once this common letter based on the hearing of yesterday will be sent out, it could be a good idea that AFCO is also looking to that specific to these specific problems related to that. Tono, you said how you see it. What is now the timing after December 2020? So I see it in the following way. If in October 2018 we need to have a withdrawal agreement, and as an annex of that, a declaration on the future relationship. Normally, the transition ends in December 2020. That gives us in total 26 months. In fact, to what we call to discuss, to negotiate this association agreement. People can say 26 months is short. I am always saying 26 months in politics, it's nearly eternity. It's long. So that's the timing. Naturally, if, for example, we are in the last element, in the last discussions of a negotiation, it will always be possible to be a little bit flexible about December 2020. That's in any way my feeling. But it gives you between 20 and 30 months. That's the reality. To put that political agreement that you will have in October 2018 into a full-fledged association agreement. And that seems for me to be possible. That's also the reason that we, but also the Council, have said to Michel Barnier that we want that declaration as detailed as possible on the future relationship. So that we know from each other, UK, EU, what we are looking for, what we mean exactly. What are the different building blocks of such an agreement, and in what direction this will go? So, from the side of the EU, there is an absolute priority to have such declaration as detailed as possible, and that makes them possible afterwards, between October 2018 and December 2020, in these 26 months, to put it into a full-fledged agreement, association agreement, with all the details that are needed. Ms. Bresso asked me about the idea of the customs union, what can happen. Well, I can only, as you notice, that there is now a proposal of the House of Lords in that sense. There is still an amendment pending in the House of Commons on that issue, but that is not the position of the UK government. So that's the only things. That is the only. So we are following this very. Closely, naturally, and it makes part, I think, of what we already described a few moments ago, the ongoing discussion in the UK for the moment. That was my next. That is what we have already. I have seen the special committee of the House of Lords a few times, 2-3 times. I'm not very good. I'm a lawyer in counting, so nevertheless I was Minister of Budget in the past. But I'm always saying, for that you don't need to know any mathematics. The only thing what you need to know is the word no, and that. But I got a few contacts already with this committee of the House of Lords, and also with the special committee on the House of Commons, Mr. Ben, who has now came already 2 times with his full committee to the European Parliament, and I try to have these contacts also when I'm myself in Britain and in all. So these contacts exist, and you have certainly looked into the report that the committee of Mr. Ben has produced a few months ago, more or less, in which also they underlined the proposal of the association agreement in that report. A report that was being published more or less a month ago by the special committee in the House of Commons. Yeah, but and if
yes, please. Yeah.
I think we have the time. My question was, in the period, the transitional period, and also after, but this is a part of the agreement, could we have something as we have, for example, with the EIA or Switzerland, that means a specific committee of both the parliament, in this case the two chambers, which represent the possibility for the European Parliament for them to have a direct exchange in this period on the going on process of the, for example, the association agreement. I think it could be useful, and is what we have with all the associated members.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. It's certainly, when we have an association agreement, then there will be a governance. That governance will have also a political chapter, where there will be such contacts will be foreseen. What we could do naturally, if we go further in that progress, is already to try to apply a number of these mechanisms during transition. That could be foreseen, certainly. So we have to look into that. First of all, we have to start about a negotiation about that future relationship, and that is not the case today. Maybe I may end with questions that Mrs. Scott Cato has put forward on the environmental standards and the social standards. Yeah, we will do everything what is necessary, and that's also the position of the negotiator, that there is no lowering of the standards during this negotiation, and that there is a level playing field that guarantee these standards. And finally, on the financial regulation, I can only confirm that the position of the European Union in this regard is to have a system of an equivalence regime. That means concretely that when the rules in Britain on a certain type of a financial product are more or less in line with the rules in the European Union, we have the possibility to authorize the import of that product, of that service in the Union. But that gives us also the possibility that if there is a change in the rules in Britain, or there is, for one or another reason, a need to intervene, that we can stop this and block this authorization. So equivalence regime is the way we look as the model for the financial services in the future. So I think, Chair, I have responded to most of the about the seat. Well, maybe we have to send that to the Irish government now, because all those with living in Northern Ireland who still have a passport will be an Irish passport and will be part of the electorate of the Irish Republic.
Okay, thank you very much. It was, of course, very interesting and informative. I do thank Guy Verhofstadt for the explanations given, although I have the impression that we will have to come back to this issue in the near future. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we move to the next item of our agenda, the European Citizen